has been officially 8 years since I graduated from law school, and approximately 7 since I have gotten my bar license. So I think it's time to really just talk about it and get into it because a lot of people don't really talk about the realities, and I think that it's time. So let's talk about it. Let's get into it. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back with y'all. And I'm going to be talking with y'all today about not fashion, but I'm going to talk about the legal profession because prior to me doing fashion and kind of taking up that interest and following it and pursuing it, I have been a legal professional for 7 years at this point. As a matter of fact, I graduated from law school today on May 14th, 2018, and then got notified that I passed the bar on May 17th, 2019, and got my bar license on May 30th of 2019. So I basically have been practicing for 7 years as of this month, and I turned 26 when I got my bar license. Like literally 2 days before I got my bar license, I turned 26. And like I said, I'm 32 now. I've been practicing and I have a lot of stories to share. So, long story short, the biggest thing about practicing law that a lot of people don't talk about are the difference between what you learn in school and the difference of what you actually do out in the field. But I think another thing that we also don't talk about is the social realities of what practicing law really looks like. A lot of people don't really understand the full context of really what practicing law looks like. What does it mean? How does it impact your day to day? So I really think that for the purpose of this video, I really want to focus on that and also talk about my experience and also share a little bit about potentially what my next steps may be in light of the year moving forward. So why don't we just jump into it? So a little bit of background about me is that, again, I've been practicing law in the state of Georgia here in the United States for 7 years, and I'm barred in Georgia and Pennsylvania. So I'm barred in 2 states. Believe it or not, Pennsylvania actually is my home state. I was born in Philly. Shout out to the 215. And I have been living here in Atlanta for 10 years. So exactly why did I decide to go to law school? Well, I decided to go to law school because initially when I was younger, when I was very, very young, I looked up to people like, Thurgood Marshall and Ruth Bader Ginsburg and all the big social justice warriors that really helped to define the Supreme Court and the excellence of the court back in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And that was the time I grew up. I grew up in the 90s. I was born in 93. So for me, I kind of looked at, okay, I want to be this legal jurist. I want to be like, that person that, was really about the mind of the law and really pursuing justice. And that was really what I wanted from the time I was very, very young. And I also thought about helping people. I mean, again, that's one thing that I've been very keen on is providing assistance, providing support, providing education and insight. That is something I've always been very, very big on. So I kind of just wanted to follow through with that. And the big thing that really took me was being a lawyer. I really thought that would be able to bring me a sense of independence in addition to also being able to help people. However, I've learned that that's not always the case. That's not always the truth of the matter because it's more complicated than what we think when we're very, very young. We all say, oh, we want to be astronauts or doctors, right? And then as we grow up, we learn the realities and the steps that it takes to get there. And for me, I went through every single one of those steps. I was in a law academy when I was in grade school. I then went to college and was in a legal communications course and graduated with a legal communications degree from Howard University. Shout out to HU. And then I ended up going to law school at Emory, which again was a decent decision, but looking back at it, I had some second thoughts about it now, looking back in time and just thinking about money and cost, which I'll get to. So, with that being said, I now want to kind of jump to my experience going to law school. And kind of just talking about what I kind of experienced because a lot of people think that when you're a lawyer, your parents have money and you just went and did it on your own. And I can tell you that I did not come from money. My parents are not rich. My parents were blue-collar workers. My mom worked for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, for the Department of Health and Welfare, and my father worked as head of maintenance at the school that I went to. So my parents were not wealthy, but they did decently well to support me and my younger sister. And ultimately, what ended up happening was I said, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and do this because I want to do it for my family. I want to do it to improve my own situation. And so, despite the odds, I applied and got into Emory, which at the time when I was applying to Emory, people were looking at my LSAT score and saying, oh, you would never get in. Oh, you should completely just give up and get a master's degree. And ha ha ha, that's just silliness. And I said, for every single person that told me no, I should just go and do something else, I wanted to prove them wrong. Well, I did. I got into Emory, got a little bit of scholarship money, but probably not enough to really move the needle, which I'll get to in a minute, and then went. So when I started Emory Law School in 2015, it was $76,000 a year to go. And I had a scholarship of $16,000 a year annually, which meant that it would have costed me $60K to go per year. And silly me, I should have thought about the math part of it back then, but I didn't. I said, I'm going to law school. I'm excited. And I beat the odds because I was told I would never get in and the chances of me being able to matriculate successfully were nil. And I said, forget it. Like, I'm still going to go ahead and prove everybody wrong. I'm going to do it. And coming from, inner city Philly and coming from a place where a lot of people don't ever get the chance to really go to college and then not alone go to law school, you get that opportunity. You're like, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do it. And I don't care how much it costs. And so I did and took out the loans like a lot of us do and went forward and did it. So what ended up happening was, as I was in Emory Law School, the reality of what would face me as an attorney hit me in the face like a ton of bricks. And it hit me so hard that I probably, looking back, should have known then what I was going to be walking into. But because I really wasn't really paying attention to that, I was just so excited to be there. It didn't register to me exactly where I was walking into and the sort of oceans that I knew were going to be teeming with, people that had narcissistic tendencies and were saying that they were professional, but they weren't. And so I kind of got a glimpse of that and a taste of that in a law school environment. One of the biggest things that I encountered in a law school environment too was at the time when I attended Emory Law School, it was 2016. And it was during the first term of the current president. So based off of what happened back then, I remember being called an affirmative action student. I remember being told that I did not fight for my place to be at the institution. And I very vividly recall people telling me that I had no place being at the law school because I'm a Black person, because of the fact that I am a queer person, because of the fact that I'm feminine presenting as a queer person. And I think the reality of it was that it was kind of like you came to law school to waste your money and your time. You're never going to be successful. You're never going to have a platform. You're never going to have space to be able to do whatever you want to do. And that was the narrative that was given to me from the moment that I walked through the door up to the time that I left. Crazy enough as it was, I made it my business to say, bump that, I'm not listening to that. And so I fought and fought and fought. So while I was there, I was in the Emory Bankruptcy Developments Journal, which is the only student-led publication for bankruptcy in the country. I was an executive managing editor of the journal during my time while I was there. I also was a e-board member of the Black Law Students Association for all 3 years that I was at Emory. So I served in some form of capacity while I was there. And then also I was a part of the public interest community and won a public interest grant so I could work at the EEOC during my first year. So I was very busy in law school, and I made it my business to demonstrate that I could do the work and that not only could I do the work, but I was an actively contributing member of that community. But for some people, irrespective of whatever I did, the fact that I was a Black person, the fact that I was a queer person, the fact that I dressed how I dressed and looked how I looked, it didn't really matter my level of professional acumen or my business acumen, or it didn't really matter exactly how smart I was or how good my grades were. I was labeled as somebody who was not meant to be here, and I was treated like that. When I was at Emory and I took the time to pursue the career services office and look for jobs, I would never get any support. As a matter of fact, I often would be told, maybe you should just find something else to do. And when I was in the career services office, I would often ask, well, what about this position? And they would kind of be like, oh, well, if you had a higher GPA, you should just apply for it. But I don't think you should. Like, to me, I think that it's telling when an institution doesn't want to support its students because they feel as though they're not going to be successful. But the reality of it is that how can you tell if a person's going to be successful or not? You know, a lot of people don't realize that those C and D students that you think are out there, or even B students that are out there, they could sometimes be more successful than the A and the A plus students because they have that drive and that push and they want to do more. But when I was at Emory, it just didn't seem like that was actually a thing. And the other thing too was there was a lot of social tension that was present at the university at the time that I was there. Again, it was the first Trump administration. And so I really had to, I would say, bite my tongue quite a bit because there were people who were not of the same socioethnic group as I was who were making disparaging comments to young Black men and young Black women, to Middle Eastern students, to Asian students, and really being quite disgusting, quite frankly. While the university, again, they had a recent scandal as of this year regarding people making racist comments. This has been a pervasive issue. This has been going on for quite some time. And just to also provide historical context, Emory University really didn't, and I'm talking about their law school specifically, Emory University didn't desegregate their law school until well after 1962. So, but for reference, my mother was born in 1960. Emory University's law school was still segregated when my mother was born. All right. So just to keep that in context, what's happening now, or what's happened recently, and what happened in 2016 is really just the echoes of a entire genealogy of racial discrimination. It's a genealogy and a consistent carry on of performative reparative justice, because the university has had diversity and equity initiatives, but as far as actually making sure that students are protected and making sure that students and their actual dignity is preserved in the institution, that's been something that's been a struggle. And even nearly 10 years later, 8 years out from when I attended, that's still a problem. And 10 years out from when I was there in 2016 when Trump got elected the first time, that was an issue then. So when I left Emory Law School in 2018, I kind of knew where I was situated. You know, normally and ideally, you would have a job lined up before you leave the institution so that when you graduate, you're going to work at the summertime, study for the bar at your firm. And then when you get your bar results, you're immediately hitting the ground running and working for that firm. But that was not my story. You see, when I was graduating from Emory Law School, at the time, my mother was getting a divorce. My grandmother was actively passing away at the time. And I did not have a job. Like, I was looking for a job and could not find one for the life of my whole last year of Emory Law School. And in that 3L year, it's like you must secure a job. And if you don't, it's kind of like curtains for you, or that's how they kind of, teach you at Emory. It's like if you can't find a job at 3L, you are kind of just like stuck in the water. Good luck trying to define your legal career for yourself. And so I said, okay, I got to find a way to salvage this and make this work. So I did. I took the bar the first time that July. And I was advised to not sit for it. I mean, I had a bar mentor and she said, I really don't think that you should really sit for the bar. And I honestly think that you should just wait a year or wait or two, or, maybe you should just think about JD preferred positions. Like, my bar mentor was literally just trying to tell me, like, don't take the bar exam because I don't think you're going to pass it. And I'm sitting over here like, what? But the first time I took the bar exam, for context, again, my grandmother had just passed away. So I was like, okay, I have to act like a death didn't just happen in order for me to focus on this test. And I recall when my grandmother was actually transitioning, what ended up happening was I actually had to tell my mom, like, hey, if she passes away, do not tell me when it happens, because if you tell me, it will impact my ability to study. And I had my bar mentor tell me that too initially. She was like, well, if you have an ailing family member, tell your family members not to call you or talk to you. And that is a real thing. For a lot of attorneys who took the bar and had family drama, we were all told that if you had family drama, you better act like your family doesn't exist. A lot of us were told that. So for me, when it happened, it was kind of like, oh crap. Like, it was like, I don't even really know how to deal with this. And then on top of that, it was like, economically, I had stuff going on too. So I took the bar and I did not pass it the first time. And I just was like, oh my God. But it was not even just the fact of the fact that I failed it. It was the fallout from the failure that really took me to places that I would have never expected. So the one thing I will say after a certain point was I realized that I was a bit of a survivalist, because when I didn't pass the bar the first time, I had to forfeit an apartment that I had. I had a job that was paying me not very much. And I had to forfeit my apartment. I nearly lost my car. And I was kind of constructively homeless for a few weeks. I was living on the floor of of a friend's apartment, of a mentor's apartment, and I just was like, what is life? Like, I never expected to go to law school and graduate to be homeless, but here I found myself in the dead of December, having to leave from a job without a bar license and having to drive 12 hours back home to Philadelphia from Atlanta to start my whole life all over again. And so there was that. I was also in an abusive relationship at the time. He was psychologically and emotionally abusive. And unbeknownst to me, he kind of just went around and told all his friends how he was embarrassed of me because I didn't pass the bar. And so it would be weird when I walk into social situations with my ex and the friends and associates be looking at me sideways. And I'm like, what the hell are they looking at me like that for? And it's like, well, no, he talked about you in a negative light and you weren't really aware of it. So just kind of thinking about it, I just was like, this is insanity. This is nuts. But how do I make it makes sense? And so I said, okay, I have two options. Either I could run away with my tail in between my legs and give up, or I can continue to fight, continue to make inroads for myself to go forward. And when the relationship goes, it just goes. Well, I decided to take the bar. And what I did was, a couple weeks before I sat for the bar exam, me and my ex had gotten into this huge thing. And I said, you know what? I don't need to talk to you because I have to focus on this test. So I said, when I finish the exam, I'll get back to this. And so for the last 4 weeks, I didn't really talk to him. I just focused on my test. I was like, I'm determined to pass the exam. And I remember I was living back in my childhood bedroom back home in Philly, unable to pay for gas half the time. And I would remember I would have to park like about a mile away from the library, because in Philly, I mean, parking is a pain. Everybody has seen Parking Wars. So it's a pain to park, especially in University City. So I parked my car, and I remember I had to walk a mile from my parking spot to the library at University of Penn to study. And I used to do that walk faithfully almost every single weekday between 7 in the morning to about 7:45. And I would get there when the library opened at 8 o'clock without fail. And I studied. So my first way how I would study was I would break up my study days. I would study everything in the morning, study all materials in the morning, outline in the morning. And in the afternoon, I was hitting practice problems, hitting practice essays from noon all the way to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Like, that was literally like how I was hitting my studies for the second time around, because I said, for me, it was imperative for me that I pass this test the second time around. And considering I was back home, I wasn't having to worry about a job, I was kind of having to refocus. I had no real reason for me not to pass in my own head. I had to make this happen. And so I did. I took the test in February of 2019 and passed it with flying colors the second time around and got notified that I passed. So when I passed the test the second time around, I was gracious. I was happy. I got everything I needed. I got sworn into the bar on May 30th. And that began the reality of what I would endure as an attorney. So my first position working as an attorney, I was working for a small family law firm, but it was high volume. So small but high volume basically means that there's a couple of attorneys, but there's a high number of cases. I recall that at the time when I was working at the firm in question where I was at, we had 3 associates and 287 clients. So if you do the math, roughly about 90 clients, 90 clients a person, which is a little bit insane, but that's what we had at the time. And I recall that when I was working there, I was making $50,000 a year, and I did not have medical insurance coverage. I did not get dental. I did not get PTO. I did not get workers' comp. I did not get anything. My first job as a salaried attorney was making, again, 50 grand a year with no medical insurance. But I was expected to come in the office by 7 in the morning. A lot of times I would have, cases in other parts of the state of Georgia, because Georgia's a big state. It takes sometimes almost close to 5 to 6 hours to drive from the north part near Tennessee all the way down to the southern part. So I'm in Atlanta. So if I'm driving anywhere south, it's going to take 3 hours, and anywhere north, if I'm going super close to Tennessee, it's nearly 2 hours. And so I would have a lot of cases in counties where very far and very rural. And for someone who was born in the Northeast, such as myself, and never really was in the deep South, like never really lived in the deep South, it was eye-opening to go to counties where there was less than 1,000 people in the deep South and endure and experience racial prejudice, sundown towns, having to be home cooked in court. And I had experienced that a lot, my first job. I mean, to the point where it was like, it was craziness. I remember that one of the big things that happened to me when I realized I had to quit was I was looking for another job because I was falling asleep. Because again, I was sleep deprived. I couldn't really, I was working 7 o'clock in the morning or 7:30 in the morning all the way to 7 o'clock at night. And then if I had to go to court in the south of Georgia or somewhere far north, I would need to leave my house 2 hours early. So it'd be 5 o'clock in the morning. So if I'm working, trying to manage everything, and I'm leaving at 5 o'clock in the morning to go to court and then expected to come back and work in the office till 7 o'clock at night, it got to be a bit much. And I remember I fell asleep at the wheel of my car at least twice on two separate occasions. And when I realized that had started happening, I said, okay, I need to start making changes or making decisions about where I want to work. So I applied for another job that had medical benefits, had coverage, and my first boss flipped his wig when he found out, screamed at me, yelled at me, called me everything but a child of God, and I said, okay. So while I was looking for another job, because he deaded my interview on that one, I said, okay, I'm going to make it my business to find another gig. And I was able to get out, find a gig that paid me health insurance. So the second job I had, I was there for 87 days. And what happened was at the second job that I was at for 87 days, they decided to cancel my health insurance. And then they said, oh, we're going to go ahead and let you go before day 90 because my health insurance became valid on day 90. So they didn't want to pay my health insurance. And I was at the time at the office constantly asking for more work, right? So they had associates at that office and they were giving them work and they always were able to get work. But when I would ask the partners for work, they never seemed to have any work available. And so that's a red flag for a lot of younger attorneys who are working at a firm. If you are working at a firm and partners are assigning work and you're not getting the work, that's a red flag. So that means you better start looking for a new position because partners are your lifeline to ensure that you have billable hours. And if they're icing you out and starving you out, and all the other associates and partners seemingly are able to get their associates work and you're not getting work, you're getting iced out, and that is a sign. So keep an eye out on that. And that was something I didn't realize, and I had to learn that lesson the hard way. So on day 87, right before COVID had hit, mind you, I had lost my job and had no benefits. And also, in addition to that, I had to get surgery, which was absolutely insane. So they basically ensured I had no medical coverage and I had no whatever. But thankfully, I was smart enough. I was on the Affordable Care Act, and I had coverage. So my surgery was mostly covered. I still had to come out of pocket at least $3,000 for it, but still, it was ridiculous because it was, my employer could say, oh, I just don't want to pay you health insurance. Goodbye, and then terminate you. And in Georgia, because it's a right to work state, it's legal apparently for people to do that, allegedly. So that then brings me to more later happenings in my career. So I just will say, as far as my total career has gone in the time that I've been in Georgia, I have worked at large firms that are huge, right? Working on teams for large global productions where there are multi-billion-dollar cases. I've worked on landlord-tenant cases for over, 6 properties across the state. I've done a lot of different types of work, varying types of work, whether it runs from business associations and mergers and acquisitions, all the way to landlord-tenant. And also I've done advisement work as well regarding insurance. And I currently have done, like I said, a lot of litigation work just across the board. So overall, I have a lot of experience. But even with that experience, the one thing that rings true is that if you are a Black queer attorney, you're going to run into a lot of challenges. And there's 2 reasons why you're going to run into challenges. Number one is that again, as a person of color and as a Black person living in America in the current political climate, there is a large contingent of people that believe that even though you had the education and even if you have the credentials, you're still not worthy enough to be in the space because they believe that someone else, by virtue of their phenotypic presentation, is better suited to do the job. And I tell people often my skin color, my voice, my ability to, show up as I show up has very little to do with my professional acumen and my competence. And I tell people that quite often because they forget. But because we live in a world where, again, people's skin color and their orientation seems to guide their competency level on the eyes of somebody else who's making the decision, unfortunately, that played out in my career. I had a lot of situations where I would experience discrimination in a courtroom setting, and my client would unfortunately be at the receiving end of it, and I would have to strategically plan for that. So it would mean that I would prepare the case for trial. I would do all the discovery, I would do all the work, but I would have to send another attorney in my place because I'm aware that the court or the judge in question has had a propensity of having differential treatment towards certain groups of people. So I have to be mindful of that as a trial strategy, and I have to send somebody else in my place. Another thing that I've had to do is I've also had clients that have outright told partners that I've worked with, I don't want to work with a Black person. I don't want to work with a person who's queer. And they will outright say that. And that is something that you're going to run into, right? And it's the reality of what it is. Like, unfortunately, even though it is 2026, we see the world for what it is in 2026, right? Racism, xenophobia are running amok everywhere. So it doesn't surprise me even now that people will take that mindset irrespective of your competency level. And so that was something I experienced quite a bit. And then even in the professional aspect of it, from a networking perspective, I live in Atlanta, right? Atlanta is a very Black professional heavy city. And I don't want to sell out my own community by saying this, but one thing I've noticed about Black professionals, Black lawyers mainly, is that we don't like to support one another because we think that there's only can be one of us in the room. Like, it could only be one Black lawyer in the room and that's it. And I think the problem is that is part of the issue, that we're not banding together to create networks and systems that work for us in actuality. And when we do create these systems, such as these bar associations are highly political sometimes in a way where, yeah, you could be a Black face in a Black bar association, but because you're queer, we don't want you here. And so I've had that experience as well. For me, I kind of have gotten to the place where if I'm going to build my own table, I have to build my own table. There is no concept of, me walking up to join someone else's table and me actively being accepted. And so I've kind of accepted that fact now in my level of career. And I'm okay with that. I think it's unfortunate, but that is my truth, and that's where I find myself as it stands right now. And I'm not going to be bitter about it. It just is what it is. So that's where things are situated. But I will say that having the experiences that I've had as a lawyer in these last 7 or 8 years, I'm genuinely thinking about what the future holds next. I have a lot of plans currently in the hopper. One thing I actually have made inroads in doing is preparing to go back to school, primarily because it's this notion of, I've been looking for jobs. I've been trying to find, ways to augment my skill set and augment the things in my toolbox. And unfortunately, sometimes people, they just don't want to let you in. So one thing about the legal community is that if you want to break into a new practice area, you have to have a partner who's willing to give you the work or source you the work and teach you and mentor you. And unfortunately, I have not had that mentorship and guidance. And the mentorship and guidance that I did have was in a very limited context. So for the work that I want to do, I know that at this particular juncture, it is 100% up to me to do it on my own. And again, that's fine. I have no qualms with that. I also acknowledge the fact that I'm going to have to work in a space where I have to build my own table. And again, as I said, I've accepted that. So with that being the case, I'm like, all right, cool, fine. If I got to do all that, then get out of my way, so let me do it. That's kind of my mindset on it. If I have to go back to school and get a whole another series of credentials to be considered to be good enough to have the job and to be taken professionally seriously, or to be taken seriously in a way where people can acknowledge that I'm more than just my skin tone and more than just my phenotypic features, more than just my voice and more than just my queerness, then so be it, right? But I think that bias and a lot of the bigotry that's currently circulating in the world has now infiltrated a lot of spaces professionally, and have done that. But now it's at a point where you are now in a position where if you are not the traditional identity in the legal world, you have to get a lot more credentials. And another thing that I think that people also don't talk about is the economic impact of this, right? Because of the fact that I now need to go back to school again, that means that I have to spend more money and incur more debt to go back to school again. For certain lawyers who are in the inn, they don't have to expend that sort of money to have an ability to go, right? So if you can easily just jump out, right, with a single JD and make $180,000 a year smack out of law school, your ability to pay your loans back is going to be very easy, because by the time you reach the fifth year out, you're making 250, 260, 270. But if you're in my position where you've been getting underpaid chronically to a factor of almost 30% annually per year in comparison to your counterparts, based on experience, based on competence, and then you find that out, it's like, okay, well, I've already been underpaid. I've already been overworked, and now I have to go back and spend even more money after expending $250,000 in my education to make you think that I'm competent enough. Yeah, of course, I'm not going to be, or any person in that position is not going to be very happy about it, but it is what it is. So where I situate myself right now, I'm not looking at myself as a victim in this. I look at myself as a person who is currently actively standing in a system that has had to cater to a certain group of people. And since I realize that I'm not that group of people, I have to work 4 times as hard just for people to even pay attention to me and think that I'm on the same level, and expend 4 times as much resources for people to think that I'm on the same level. And while it's not fair, right, that's unfortunately the way how the system has been working for me. And again, I don't cry about it. It just is what it is. But I say all this to say, I say all of this to say, for those of you who wish to be lawyers, this is not a be scared, don't do it. This is a, if you are a Black attorney, if you are a queer attorney who is, or somebody who's aspiring and who is a person of color, who is queer, please be prepared for the fact that you will have to fight your ass off to get where you want to go. This is not a cakewalk. This is not going to be a situation where people are going to hand you anything. And if you are a person of color and if you are a queer person in this current society, you will have to fight, right? I had to fight the last 8 years and I'm still fighting now. But for you, in this particular world right now where anti-intellectualism wins the day in a lot of cases, you're going to have to fight really, really hard. So I'm saying all this as a warning. I'm saying all this as a way of encouragement. And I'm also telling you that at the end of it, right, there's still a way for you to prevail and to be successful. So with that being said, I just want to go ahead and leave y'all with this. It has been a pleasure sharing everything with y'all today, and I will see y'all in the next one. Toodles.